For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. That's the good news of the gospel for the day. In the words of the Apostle Paul. Remarkably, however, I suppose the women who visited the tomb on that first Easter morning didn't actually appreciate the news. The grave clothes were in the tomb, the stone was rolled away. Where was Jesus? They'd gone to take spices, they'd gone early because the day before they'd celebrated the Sabbath, which was on a Saturday. And on that day, they weren't allowed to do anything. They had to sit and rest and relax and to read and to learn. And they hadn't seen Jesus since he'd been on that cross on that Good Friday. And they must have been really, really restless on that Sabbath day, thinking about nothing but Jesus hanging from that cross and about the sorrow and the grief that went with it. And therefore, I imagine that they went very early on that first Easter morning so they could take spices for his burial. One of the ladies arrived early. I suppose they might have been expected to meet up, to join together and go to see this place where Jesus was buried. But no, one of the Marys had got there first. And when Mary Magdalene had got there, she looked in the tomb and she thought, oh no, somebody's stolen Jesus' body. And the first thing she did was, I suppose, what we would all do if there's bad news somewhere, we'd go and tell somebody we know. So she rushed off to tell the disciples. And the disciples that she met first, of course, were John and Peter. And they just didn't believe it. Would you believe it? If somebody said to you, there's a stone that weighs goodness knows how much, has been rolled away? Who did that? They didn't have forklift trucks then. Who did that? And so they were distraught. What's happened? Have we had grave robbers in the night? Has something awful happened? And they didn't quite believe it, so they rushed off. They rushed to the tomb. And they thought, I'm not sure I actually want to go in here. What am I going to find? So one of them goes in the tomb, says, and one of them stands outside and says, I can't go in there. I don't want to go in there. And the other one goes in and looks and says, they're just grave clothes. The body's gone. Where has Jesus gone? Sometimes, in our lives, we have occasions, don't we, when we think, we are having a bad time, things are not going altogether well, and we think to ourselves, well, what do I do now? God's not done anything for me today. All he's done is send me all these problems. I don't know whether I'm coming or going. I don't know what to do. We read of problems on the news, and we read of the Ukraine, and we read of places at war and people being murdered. And we think, where's God? And sometimes we think, because we're human, I suppose, we go around and we think, well, I can do things better myself. Because we're that sort of people, aren't we? We don't want to rely on other people because that doesn't mean we've got control ourselves. And that's just not good all the time, is it? So we have to rely on ourselves. And that doesn't work always, does it? That doesn't always happen. And then things go wrong and they go from bad to worse. And once again, we turn around and we blame God, and it's bad news. It's bad news all the way. And then suddenly we realise, hang on a minute, all we have to do is go to God and say, look, I'm really, really sorry. I really, really need to come back to you, and I really, really need to ask for your help. And you know, the strange thing is people think they have to be in church to talk to God. People think, oh, it's Sunday, I can go and talk to God this morning. What they don't realise is that God is everywhere. He's with you, he's in the car with you, he's on the bus with you, he's going around Asda shopping with you, if that's where you go. Wherever you are, God is available 24/7. And isn't that wonderful? We don't ever have to rely on ourselves for 1 minute. Because if we stick with God, he is there and he looks after us. And so they've gone to the tomb on that Easter morning and it's been empty. That's bad news. Until suddenly Jesus appears to them, to Mary, and says, "Why are you crying? I have risen." And what does she do? She goes and rushes up to him and she wants to get hold of him. And he said, "Don't touch me now." That's what you want to do, isn't it? When you see somebody you haven't seen for a long time and you see something that, you know, is a relief, and you see that person back again and you think something bad might have happened to them. And what do? You rush up to them. The first thing you want to do is stick your arms around them and say, "Yes, you know, you're safe. I love you." But the one thing she really, really wanted to do, she couldn't do. And yet, why didn't those disciples understand what Jesus had been telling them all the time that he'd been talking to them, all the time that he'd spent with them and explaining to them things that were going to come to pass, etc.? Why did they not understand that Jesus was going to rise again? Why were they so surprised to find an empty tomb? Why are we so surprised when we find things, when we find God for the first time? You know, when I first found God, I thought to myself, well, you know, I was already there. I was a Christian. I'd been to church since I was knee-high to a spider. Obviously, this made me a Christian, didn't it? Wonderful. So yeah, great. That was the good news. Until one day, my minister came to visit me, and by this time, I'm a very slow person to learn. I must have been in about my early 30s by this time. A minister came round to see me on one of his usual visits, and he was having a cup of tea, and he said, "Right, I must go now." So I said, "Right, okay then." And I got to the door, and I said, "By the way," I said, "I just want to mention, I haven't been baptised, and I think, you know, I'd quite like to." So he said, "We've sat all this time," he said, "having a cup of tea and a biscuit. Very nice it was," he said, "but we've sat all this time and had it. You've let me get to the door, and then you tell me that's what you want to happen." He said, "Back in." So we trot back in. I thought, gosh, another biscuit? We sat down because I'd only been prayed over as a child. I'd never been baptised. And we sat down and talked about it, and he said, yes, he said, "I'd love to do that for you." And so we arranged for the local Baptist church and to use their pool. I was promised it was going to be nice and warm. They always heated it up first. It was great. And everything was wonderful. And so the day arrived. Went in, and I think for the first time I realised I'd actually prayed properly. We had to read something out about asking for forgiveness of sins and for the things that we'd done in the past, and I found myself really, really meaning that. It really meant something. And so the time came to go into the pool, and I have to say I hate water. I'm terrified of water. And it's the one thing that I've always been frightened of. Because when I was a child, I was pushed into the baths about 3 times, and I was quite scared that I wouldn't get out again. Anyway, so I went down the water. It was easy. Warm did not enter into it at all. It was freezing. I think I must have been blue by the time I came out of there. I came out after baptism. I was like this, so they wrapped me up. But do you know, I felt so loved, so at peace. It's what I'd really missed, apparently, all my life. I didn't realise I'd missed it because I'd never had it. But to me, that was good news. Good news out of the bad news. I had to endure the very cold water. But the good news, that I knew and felt like I belonged. And I went home. We'd had our parents around at the time, and my husband had taken them home, and I was reading the Bible, and all of a sudden I felt this wonderful closeness, this feeling that God loved me so much. And then this voice I thought I heard say, "Feed my sheep." And I so felt loved. And it's what we miss out on so many times, the feeling of being loved so very much. And it's a special sort of love, a unique love for each and every one of us. And so all I really want to say this morning is bad news does not have to stay bad. It can turn to good news. And I urge you that if you haven't found that peace and you haven't found that love, you don't really have to search for it. You don't have to do an Easter egg hunt. You don't have to find anything, because the surprise is there waiting. Just ask God to come into your life. Tell him you're sorry for the things you've done. Tell him how very, very much you want him. And he'll be there, arms wide open, saying, "Welcome." We can celebrate this Easter morning with such joy and such wonder and such love, because God is there for us every inch of every day. Don't spend one more minute or one more hour of your life without God in it. You'll never regret it.